Hello, everyone. Welcome to our video series on self-organization. I'm Floris. I'm here with Daan, um, and we're going to tell you all about our experiences with self-organizations for the past few years here.
Right on. Hi, folks. My name is Daan, and here to share with you the knowledge that we have learned, and it's related to GaiaNet because we are stewards of that organization with the purpose to unite all of the contributors to the new Earth in a regenerative network and facilitating thereby the implementation of a community-type civilization. We act here today as a self-organization guide, and the way we facilitate this emerging new Earth is through active co-creation support. And if you want to learn more about what is the new Earth and community-type society, we refer you to the Auravana website, which has a very clear specification of that. So, what does this mean, co-creating a new Earth that works for everyone? Well, for us, that basically means a world without power abuse, a world where individuals are invited to transform themselves to live their higher purpose in whatever work that they do. So that can be to build cities and villages, but it can also be to focus on the current infrastructure of humanity and to improve operations, governance, but also the resonance between the individuals. So we feel comfortable as GaiaNet in many different spaces.
Yes, definitely. So here are a couple of the topics we're going to dive into today. We're going to tell you a little bit about us. Of course, we'll try to keep that short. We're going to talk about the scope of this specific presentation and the others we're going to do. We're going to tell you about Holacracy, what it means that if purpose is the boss. We're going to talk about self-leadership, distributed authority, a little bit about decentralization and the things happening in that space. Partners and roles, governance, operations, the different contexts within an organization, and some conclusions. And what is very important is that we want to give a lot of credit to the organizations and people mentioned on the right here. Holacracy 1, which is the founding organization of Holacracy, we'll talk a little bit about them later. Energized, which is one of the Dutch organizations working a lot with Holacracy, where I also did my practitioner in Holacracy, so they taught us a lot. Julia, of course, who was the person who actually brought in Holacracy into GaiaNet, so she actually started us off in this particular path, so thank you very much. And of course, Swao, Jonathan, Tom, Christiani, Joost, people who have been around us, like really some of the most hardcore leadership and autonomous organizations people out there. And they've been helping us with like so much love and passion. It's just beautiful. And of course, GaiaNet, the playground that we have to explore all these topics, the amazing people that got connected to us through this portal, through this organism. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add something to those credits, Dan.
Just to mention, one of our core values is transformation, and it is that whole people create whole systems. And we have been on a tremendous journey through Holacracy and self-organization to transform ourselves to create whole systems, and that's all thanks to GaiaNet.
Definitely, yeah. It's been definitely a speedy road since that all took off, for sure. So a little bit about us. Maybe, Dan, you want to start here?
Sure thing. Yeah, I've been fascinated all my life about how to get things done, and I studied in universities. I worked in hands-on organizations as a mechanic, as an aircraft engineer. I have a background in aerospace engineering, so also at the university there was very complex projects there. And I found myself regularly really struggling, with authority and with leadership and how to get people activated. And I naturally took this kind of a leading position, but it never felt so comfortable. So there are spaces where I shine, where I know that I have the full authority. For example, I've been organizing also man circles or plant medicine circles, where I'm clearly the facilitator and I'm in the lead. And then it's easy for me to coordinate the space and the people. But once more people had a voice, then I always got confused. And I really believe we have cracked the code now with GaiaNet. And we are all feeling on fire, and nobody has any power over anybody else. Everything is voluntary. And it's just such a joy to work together like this. And I think I've been dreaming about this all my life. So I'm super excited to share our findings and this presentation with you today. Aho.
Oh, yeah. Well, I definitely recognize a lot of what you're saying, of course. And it's, for me, so I've been building different organizations, both for profit as non-profit, for the past, I don't know, 10 years or so. And like, it was such a big difference already, because on the one hand I was building like an online marketing and a software company, so a lot of big complex projects, but you were paying people so they would just like kind of do what you say, which was quite confusing to me to begin with, because I was hiring someone because they had a certain set of skills, and then they would ask me like, what should I do? And what like, that's what I hire you for. I want you to like help us move forward. But and then with the volunteer organizations, there's a different commitment, because there's no monetary exchange, and that means that people want to have a say a lot more. That means that a lot of those communities are looking for consensus, which takes a long time, and the bigger the group is, the more terrible it gets, and you get like this implicit hierarchy structures where people are just the boss, even though it's not explicitly said. So there's a lot of ego play and all that kind of stuff going around. So it was on the one hand like these political games, and then on the other hand, it's just people telling you what to do, which is like, I'm not good at that, so I don't want to tell anyone else what to do either. But how are you going to organize any other way, And like we have been experimenting with many different forms and trying to figure out how we can get this to work. And then finally, Holacracy came on our paths, and it actually clicked, And I hope to share a little bit about that today as well. So, yeah, a little disclaimer. This is not an official Holacracy class. We're not certified trainers, and we cannot use this. It means that you, as a listener or as a receiver of this video, cannot use it in any commercial way either. We are not licensed Holacracy coaches. As I said, I did do the practitioner, and I have ambitions to do the coaching as well. So maybe by the time you see this, that happens. But for now, definitely not the case.
But it's worth mentioning, everything on the GaiaNet is registered open source under the Creative Commons. So this video is not going to be sold to anybody, and you are free to distribute it to as many people as you want.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. So a little bit about the scope of this presentation. So in this presentation, we will focus mainly on first principles, not per se on the mechanics of the process. We will discuss the mechanics in other videos, but this is really about the basics and the mindset, because that's already quite deep. It is really a practice, self-organization, a deep practice, and that requires a lot of commitment and quite a lot of big mindset shifts. And we'll go into that in this presentation. And if you're curious about the actual nuts and bolts, that will be found in the other presentations. And our hope and our aim with this set of presentations is to kind of bring you to the beginner level, right? You're really only going to learn by playing, by practicing, by going in deeply, but it is nice to have some handle on what's happening. And we hope that these presentations will at least give you the tools and the language to navigate through this space. And then this is what likely happens to many of us.
Including us.
Definitely. This is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it basically states that if you enter a new field of work or of expertise or field of interest, then after learning a little bit, you read 1-2 books, you feel like you're an expert, and then you get deeper into the field, and then you enter in what they call here the valley of despair, and you start to realize, oh my God, I have no idea what we're doing. And then slowly after a while your competence grows, and then also your confidence grows. And I have to admit, I feel like at GaiaNet took us at least a year of Mount Stupid to actually dive into the valley of despair. And I think we're on the slope of enlightenment now. So I hope that's true, and it's not secretly another Mount Stupid peak. But we'll find out.
I think we're good, man. We got the feedback from experts that we're doing really well, so they must see where we are.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And of course, a lot of the content is not created by us, but definitely inspired by all those people who actually have that deep knowledge and well, in some cases, 15 years of experience with this specific practice. So what we're going to talk about in this presentation is mainly about holacracy. So holacracy is a method. It's founded in 2007 by Brian Robertson and Tom Thomason, who founded Holacracy One, which is the company behind Holacracy. And really what it is, it's a self-organization practice. And I use that word quite specifically because it is such a deep shift in mindset that it is comparable to many other practices. I don't know, yoga, meditation, forms of art, whatever, where there's like it keeps spiraling and you just keep getting deeper into it and your mindset just keeps shifting deeper into self-leadership. And you know, it's really it consists of a set of rules called the Constitution, which is basically a description of the rules of the game. And there's a set of meeting formats, really. And those three combined give you, well, many of the tools that you need to coordinate work in an organization in a self-organizing way. So where people have levels of autonomy, they can make their own decisions and move the organization forward. Do you want to add something to this, Dan?
You covered most, but it's about distributing the authority and letting purpose guide the way. And we'll go much deeper in those two topics also in this session.
Yes.
So there we are.
There we go.
Distributing
take
authority.
It off then.
So what does that mean? This sentence that Tom shares with us, which is distributed authority to manifest organizational purpose. And what Tom is saying when he talks about holacracy, it's distribute everything. So not only the authority, but distribute decision-making, the power that comes with it, distributing the leadership of individuals to all become autonomous, independent agents of purpose. So also distributing all the work. And why do we do that? Why do we distribute authority? Because it is a unique way to give people ownership of their part of the organizational purpose. And the way they do that is by energizing roles that all hold a little piece of authority. So imagine normally you have a C-suite level that holds all the authority pretty much, and then you have an executing layer in an organization and they are following that authority. But here the authority is evenly distributed over all of the players in the organization. And then you might think, but wait, if everybody has authority, then who's the boss? Well, that's why it is so important to have proper organizational purpose. Once you've really defined what is the great goal, what brings you all together that you're all excited about, then you can make that the boss. And for this presentation, I think this is enough, and we'll go much deeper in other parts of how do you actually do that, because that's an art as well.
Yeah, so the word holacracy is based on the word holons. And a holon is really a part that's also a whole. So something that is, well, for example, the example you see here. So there are all these different particles that together form atoms. They form molecules. Molecules form cells. Cells form organs. And organs and other parts form the organism. And an organ, for example, you can see that as a whole. You know, it's one system. But it's also part of a bigger whole. You can't separate the two from each other. And what you see is there's a level of self-organization within a set of rules, in this case, the laws of nature, the laws of physics, that determine the freedom that these holons have. And together they form this one organism with a specific purpose in a very biological way that would be to survive and propagate. So it's really about self-organization on every level, you know, having the organization and the authority there where the work is actually being done. So the literal meaning of the word holacracy is governance of and by the organizational holons. And that's an important piece of language, organizational holons, because in Holacracy there's a very clear distinction between the role and the person, or the role and the soul, as they often refer to it. Because the people are not holons. We're not like just a part of the organization. What we do as people is we step into an organization where we embody a certain role or multiple roles, and those roles are the holons of the total organization. So now what an important nuance is that as a holon you are not fully autonomous, right? So there is freedom on every level, but there's also you also affect the other parts, of course. You don't want one organ in your body or one cell in your body to go rogue and just start spreading. No, you are still part of a bigger system. So it is needed that there's communication between all those different parts, right? So Holacracy is organic and evolutionary. It's really about constantly adapting the way we are working, varying, testing, and then encoding it and implementing it without a central designer. The design emerges from evolution itself. Now, this is an interesting piece, and I can imagine it feels like a lot, this sentence, right? Because there's a lot in there. But what it's really about is that in Holacracy, we are constantly adapting, we're sensing and responding to the environment, to the world around us, to work towards that bigger purpose that we're going to. And that shifts all the time. So it's not like you have like this one design and we just keep doing that. It just keeps adapting and adapting and adapting. You're going to test a lot, make a lot of mistakes, do a lot of weird things. That's what happens if you give everyone authority, right? But actually, in the end, by encoding the stuff that does work, then you have that evolutionary process, which is a lot faster in actually fitting the world around us.
For me as an individual, this has really been a process of letting go. It's been a process of getting out of my mind, trying to predict the future, and then trying to, I don't know, influence the other people around me in the GaiaNet organization if they're also moving in that direction that I am predicting. But who am I? I can never know the future like that. So it's so liberating, instead of making 3 or 6 month strategies and structures, to give that trust also to each other. It's really about surrendering to each other and trusting that everybody holds a piece of space. And the longer you work together in Holacracy, that trust grows also. And yeah, for me, it's been such an internal transformation of coming to peace and trusting in the process, just like in many other things in life. Yeah.
Yeah, trust the process. That's definitely a key sentence, because like that is what that rule set is for in Holacracy. That constitution is to make sure that if you give everyone full authority and autonomy to just go, there's risks there, and you want to make sure that everything that does come up, any potential harm to the organization or really serious things that can go wrong, will be covered, will be sorted out when they happen, preferably before they happen if they have large impact. And that's where that constitution comes in. That's where the meeting structures come in. So there's a whole system there to make sure that all tensions are solved and all objections are heard and integrated. So, Daan, let's dive into the history.
Yeah, where does this all come from? It's nice to have a little bit of an understanding for you all listening to where does this originate from. And to be honest, it originates actually like tens of thousands of years back, when we used to sit in circle together and we moved around with groups of 30 people, 100 people, small groups of people that were self-organizing and that were autonomous and that were also interacting and trading with other groups at that time. I'm talking about before agriculture, people, so a long time ago. But where this concept of Holacracy is based on is like the oldest thing that we can find back is from a person called Lester Frank Ward, who was looking at how does majority voting work, how does this democracy work in the United States. And he came up with something to replace that, which is sociocracy. And it's very similar to Holacracy. You can read a lot about that online if you want. And this sociocracy was first introduced in an organization in the Netherlands, in a school system in Bilthoven in the mid-20th century. Then many people read about it, and specifically Tom and Brian, who came up with the concept of holacracy. And what else have they included besides sociocracy? Because it's largely based on sociocracy, huh? But they were also looking at cybernetics, at physics, at mysticism. How does consciousness work? And how can we get things done, really? So how can we develop complex systems used with self-organizing structures? And I like what they say about holacracy is a new way of structuring and running your organization that replaces conventional management. Power is distributed throughout a concrete organizational structure, giving individuals and teams freedom while staying aligned to the organizational purpose. And I think they really got it. So let's continue and share more about this wonderful system.
Yeah, so one thing I want to add here as well is the background of Brian in software. Of course, it's also fitting with my own background, because within software development, they figured out a long time ago that it doesn't work to make big plans. Why? Software development takes a lot of work. So that means, you have this, some people have a crazy idea. There's this big platform that needs to be built. They just, put this team of developers there and they just start building. It takes a long time, 2-3 years, whatever. And then the platform is done. And then you come back to the people with the platform and they say, like, what is this? Like, the reality changed completely. This is not what we need at all anymore. So what they started doing is called Scrum. You might have heard of it. It's been quite a hype as well, where basically you have these very small iterations where every 2 weeks you just do another release of a small change to the platform. And in that way, you can react very quickly to any changes in the outside world, and just be like very agile and being able to move around. So basically, one of the inspirations for Brian was as well, like, okay, so if we do that with software, why don't we do that with the organizational structure itself? Why is that so static? Why do all these people have these set roles and they stay there for years, and then have these predetermined paths of moving forward in the organization? Why doesn't that change based on the needs of the here and now? So that's also included in this whole system of actually updating the governance all the time. And it's, So this is a really important picture to understand what holacracy is and what it isn't. Because, so what we see here is 4 different spaces. So let's start with the left top. You have the people context. Then in the bottom, you see the team context. Right top, you see the role context. And right bottom, you see organizational context. Now, what holacracy is about, it's just about the organization. So holacracy is not about people. And that's sometimes confusing, because you are there, all these people together, you form this team, and there's like interpersonal stuff going on. But there's a very clear distinction there about, again, the role and the soul. Okay, so there's an organization with a purpose, and that has all these different roles that needs to be filled in order to achieve that purpose. And how roles work together and how you are building that organization, that is covered in holacracy. So that also means that the relationship between people, team building, all that kind of thing, it's not covered in holacracy at all. Very explicitly not. So of course, as GaiaNet, we added all these different kind of structures and formats in order to also do all the interpersonal work. But that's not what holacracy is about. And actually, it already helps, like having that clear separation between role and soul and about organization in your own life, that already solves a lot of interpersonal tensions, because people tend to identify with the organization they're in, identify with the role they're in. And that means that if another role doesn't perform the way you expect, then there's interpersonal tension. And in holacracy, we try to separate that and make sure that the tension is from role to role. And the conversation changes tremendously when that happens. Well, as an example, for example, Daan has an ID in GaiaNet, so he brings it in and he can say, like, okay, I want to build this retreat center. I made this budget. It's going to be 20 million and let's go. Then me, as the finance role, I can say, like, well, Daan, from my finance role, I feel some tensions around that because we don't have that money. While if I take my hat off and I'm Floris again as a friend, I love the work you put in and the ideas is amazing, let's figure out how we can do that. But again, with the finance, no, and that it solves so much already. You want to add there, Dan? I already saw you unmute.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that even though Holacracy separates that very clearly and we are presenting 4 different spaces, obviously the people context is super important. So how you relate to each other is very important, but also how you grow as an individual. And again, to emphasize, this is also clearly described by Tom, like an organization is not made up of people. An organization is made up of roles doing the work. But without the people, there's no organization. So I want to emphasize that because many people find Holacracy very mechanical, a little bit dead. They miss the human warmth, they miss the connection. And I emphasize that for really proper resonance and alignment of people operating in a self-organizing system, the things on the left that are not covered by Holacracy are equally important as the things covered by Holacracy. So I just want to emphasize that here.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And it does actually help to separate those contexts and spaces very clearly, because it's much easier to get on a human level resonance with someone if you actually have that space and you actually said, okay, we're now with people, we're humans here meeting, versus, okay, now we're coordinating work as roles. And by taking those apart and actually doing both, of course, it just makes life a lot more fun and easy, actually. So Daan, what is purpose?
Why is it so important? What is purpose? I think the next slide has a beautiful quote of Brian Robertson here. Because purpose, as he says, is a reason for being. Now that's quite a statement, no? A reason for being. But look around you. Everything has a purpose. Well, not everything has a purpose in this world anymore. Everything used to have a purpose. There's a lot of things that have no purpose anymore nowadays, but let's steer away from that. In this particular context, it's about understanding that the greater goal that unites you in an organization can be leading for the work that you coordinate. And you can make this greater goal and this greater purpose the boss. I think when you are together and you are experiencing personal conflict in whatever context, whether that's your marriage, a friendship, or in the work, if you can remind yourself of why you are together, and you can remind yourself of the purpose of the two of you or more of you together, then usually the personal indifferences just drop away. Because you remember again the greater level of connection between each other. And therefore purpose is so important, but it's that important that it becomes a reason for being. In Holacracy, you create a greater goal, greater purpose for the organization, and then you split that up in smaller purposes that are carried by roles. So each role needs to have a very clear purpose statement. And you will feel also as an individual, when you start to energize that role, you're starting to embody that purpose, and you will start to see how important you are in this overall system. And that creates a reason for being. So I already explained a little bit, but this means you're going to have a hierarchy of purpose. There is the greater goal that's split up in smaller purposes that are hierarchical. They all serve that greater goal. And human beings are hierarchical by nature. We're not going to go into the psychology behind that, but that's where this line of thinking comes from. And then the authority is held by the roles and not by the individuals. So next to a purpose statement, each role will have certain accountabilities and maybe a domain or some policies, which we will cover later. And that gives you the authority to take action autonomously. And this doesn't necessarily eliminate power structures, but it significantly reduces the abuse of power between people. And it also gives people an opportunity to align their personal purpose to organizational purpose. But it is very important to mention, an organization has not the purpose to fulfill people's purposes. So in the most ideal situation, your personal purpose is completely aligned with the organizational purpose. But for self-organization to work, that is not a prerequisite. Many people energize roles that they do voluntarily because nobody else is doing it and it doesn't really serve your personal purpose. I'm doing a lot of things in the organization that I don't really enjoy doing, but why do I do them? I do them because I feel a reason for being. I feel a reason that if I do this, it's going to help the organization to the next level. And again, it's continuously connecting with that thing, that greater part outside of yourself, to the point where we even envision something for the next 7 generations. So we feel this generational purpose in the work that we are doing. And it just makes it a wonderful experience to coordinate work together.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I want to add a almost personal note here, because it's not per se very defined within Holacracy, but for me, the word purpose is just lovely. And I would really want to invite everyone to not have the purpose, a beautiful world, for example, because like the more concrete and like real the purpose is, the easier it is also to make decisions towards that, right? Because you as a role, or if you're embodying roles within the organization, you have to be able to feel that purpose. And the vaguer it is, the less sure you are that the other roles, the other people filling the roles, are working towards that same purpose. Because if it's a beautiful world, somebody might enjoy like that it would be one big New York, all of it, and another person would say like, no, we just want to have forests, and another person wants all the houses to be pink. I don't know, there's a lot of divergence there. So the clearer the purpose is, the easier it is to make decisions as a role towards that purpose. So, problems with traditional authority. Well, I think most of us have experienced quite a few different problems with traditional authority, depending as well on your own personality type. I know for myself and Daan, we're not great with authority to begin with. If other people try to tell us what to do,
I have no problems with authority.
Yeah. So, and there's an interesting thing here where like the boss holds all the power and authority. And it's also to make the distinction between power and authority, because authority is kind of about, are you allowed to make a certain decisions? Are you free to move in a certain direction? And power is really about what you can expect or what you can make others do, and if one person has both, well, I can imagine that people get into this ego thing eventually if you're long enough on that path, and it's going to be very hard to get you out, and it actually limits people in their work and evolution, because, and we see that all the time, we have that with GaiaNet as well, and the organizations we're guiding through self-organizational practices. Like, it's so beautiful to see the evolution that comes up if you give people the power and the freedom to actually act according to their own, what they feel is needed, and that's hard. That's not something we're used to, like starting from childhood, your parents telling you what to do, then teachers telling you what to do, then your boss tells you what to do. We're not at all used to making decisions ourselves. So there's a lot of things that come up, which makes for a beautiful evolution, actually. And also you also start to recognize your own roles more. That's at least something that happened for me, that I started to see, like, the more I was able to free other people in their own roles, so as to not take that CEO role that I was used to and, micromanaging what other people were doing, just give them the complete freedom to do whatever, because I trust that they're going towards that purpose. That also made my own roles a lot more clear, and therefore also my own passions and the things I actually love to do, because, it's less about doing all these different things and being like manager, and much more about finding where can you actually add the most value to the organization to work towards the purpose. So traditional authority, of course, guarantees power play, right? That's also what we mentioned in the first sentence. There's a lot of ego there. You need to get stuff done, but if one person holds authority, then there's manipulation going on, and you're trying to get buy-in with other people to get something done or whatever. And it just creates this political, just a terrible place to work, really, because it's really a fear and scarcity based system. That's really what it comes down to. You have to kind of fear the boss, and there's not enough, so you better do what they say because they will give you the money. And it's just very unhealthy, I think, to be organized on a societal level like this. of course, things get messy in that way.
Yeah, so I've noticed that really practicing this together with you guys within GaiaNet has also liberated some of my other roles in my life, of being a husband, of being a father, of setting the right rules and sets and together with my wife for raising the child. But wow, man, I've really transformed as an individual completely in the coordination of action together with everybody in my life. So yeah, it's an incredible journey. It's not just like a job anymore. It's really like evolving as a human being and reaching your next level in your stage of consciousness in relationship to other beings.
Yeah, that's definitely a warning for the people watching with partners at home. You're gonna take this home as well.
Yes, you'll take your
No,
work
it's true,
home,
and yeah, for sure.
but in a
And
positive way.
it's actually beautiful. Yeah, yeah. No, I have the same, like, where I'm now able to say to my partner, like, okay, I know your sense of style in the house is a lot better than mine. So instead of asking me every time, just go. And if I feel a lot of tension about something, I'll mention it. And of course, I'm willing to give feedback or whatever. And if you ask me for input, but feel free to take any decision that you want. And that's so freeing as well. So yeah.
Yeah. That's why you see a green and red wall here, because I did the same with my wife. She chose all the colors, and I was like, just buy the paint and make it happen, I trust. And it's turned out super beautiful. Amazing. So, we covered most of this, huh? About purpose being the boss and the hierarchy of purpose. I shared this with you, but basically the mindset here for you to take with you today is that you move from a hierarchy of people that hold power and authority. You move to a hierarchy of purpose where roles hold authority. And in that sense, you have nested holons. That's also where it comes from. In Holacracy, you have the greatest circle holding the organizational purpose. And each circle is nested, is a smaller circle inside of that larger circle. And there is that hierarchy of purpose where each circle serves the purpose of the higher circle, of the super circle as it's called. And like I say, the most outer circle holds the purpose of the organization. And it's really beautiful because all the partners are invited once every 3 months, 6 months, once a year, whatever, to look at this greater purpose of the organization, and all voices then are influencing that greater purpose. So it's a wonderful co-creation at the highest level that everybody aligns with, and then all months after that, you're serving that co-created greater purpose.
Yes. So here's a visualization of that with an example next to it. Right, so an example of a purpose might be creating a global power shift through self-organization. So let's say that's the big purpose we're all working towards. So what you will notice is that there are a lot of kind of sub-purposes that you can fill in order to move towards that bigger purpose. So that's the blue ones, right? Those are the different roles that are making up the organization. So an example of a role in this case might be a self-organization coach. Now, that role has certain accountabilities, as they're called, or kind of, which are really focus areas that are the areas that we can expect work being done from that role as an organization. So each role has specific accountabilities. So the self-organization coach might have the accountability of providing one-on-one support to clients practicing self-organization. Now, out of that accountability come different projects. So a project is really anything that will take more than one action to complete. That's the definition of a project within Holacracy. So an example of a project might be a peer-to-peer support network for training participants. And then within that project, there are actions that one does. For example, call video meeting software to open new spaces. That will be an action that leads to the finishing of the project that helps you with doing the accountability to serve your role in order to, right? That's kind of the pyramid, the traditional kind of view of hierarchy, but then instead of people, you have purpose. So Holacracy turns the tables on how authority works. Safety checks are built into the system to prevent organizational harm. That means that asking for permission no longer has to be the default, and all employees can drive fast. is a quote from Holacracy 1, probably on their website somewhere. And this is so beautiful, liberating, difficult as well. Like, we still have meetings where, for example, I bring in a certain point where I felt like I wanted feedback, for example, or I wanted input from the others. But really what I was doing was asking for permission. And those are kind of slight, like, am I doing the right thing here? That is really what was behind that question, but I didn't even notice it myself. And we really try to help each other to become aware of those moments, and like, who are you asking permission for? Because just go. And if something does go wrong, safety checks are built into the system to prevent organizational harm. And that's again where you can just relax into the process, because you know that all these tensions, all these objections will come up and will be handled.
So what I heard Tom say once in a talk about when he was explaining Holacracy and the implementation also and the transformation that people go through, and I think it's quite realistic when we look at how much time it took us in GaiaNet to get good at this. And he say it takes about 2 to 3 years for people to wash off all the corporate nonsense, as he called it. And it might take another 2 to 3 years to wash off all your programming of being a human. That means we have been limited by all of the work environments that we've been in of seeking approval, but also in our lives we've been really programmed by this limiting belief. And Holacracy really liberates you that asking for permission no longer has to be the default. But there's a little disclaimer here, it really takes a lot of time to get good at this. So give yourself the time also when you embark on this journey.
Yeah, and on both sides, both from like the people who are used to taking orders as giving orders. It's
true.
Quite, I'm also reminded of like the title that I think Brian Robertson has on Medium under his name, which is like a recovering CEO, which made me laugh a little bit. Like, it really is, it really is. I believe that he's,
Good.
So this kind of summarizes it, So really, in a traditional organization, most of the time, any action is forbidden unless it's explicitly permitted by legitimate authority. So that means that you're really scared to move, until you get like a lot of clarity on where you're allowed to move. And with Holacracy, it's completely the other way around. It really means that any action is permissible unless explicitly forbidden by a legitimate authority. And that legitimate authority is, well, the Constitution and the policies you set together and the rule sets. So you are really free to just start going. And as soon as you mess up so deeply that we all want to make sure that never happens again, then you would introduce a rule that would specify what you are and what you're not allowed to do within like a process in Holacracy itself.
And the way this works, that anybody can just move, is because of the transparency in the system. And this also you can, you probably have experience when working in traditional organizations, you're not allowed to have certain access in the organization. Things are hidden, budgets are hidden, maybe function descriptions are hidden, or what's happening in the boardroom is hidden for the organization. There's a lot of conversations going on that are not noticed by anybody else. Holacracy really, I would almost say, forces people to be completely transparent, because you can ask any other partner, what are you doing right now? What are your next steps? What are our budgets? And it's all co-created in openness, in transparency. There's a beautiful statement in Auravana that says the only way in our civilization we're going to have 100% trust is by having 100% transparency. So know that any action is permissible is based on a sense of transparency of all the operations. You update each other on a weekly basis on what you're all doing, and thereby you are tensioning the system and everybody just moves, and it's wonderful. So I think that's an important footnote also.
Yeah, and something else that comes up for me with this slide as well is like, there are still rules, right? As I said before, you are not fully autonomous and you cannot do everything you want. You can't just spend everything from the company on a car that you like, for example. There are still rules there. And those rules are super important because, so there was this research that I think we talked about, Daan, where you have like this, in scenario 1, there's a group of kids and they put it on a field with their teacher in the middle and just a big open field. And what you see is they, start moving a little bit and, start spreading out over the field. And then in scenario 2, what they did is they have the same field, but there's a fence surrounding it. So there's boundaries. And what you see is the moment the kids are on there, poof, everyone just starts moving in all different directions, finding all boundaries because they know what the boundaries are. And if the boundaries are explicit, and that's super important in Holacracy, if it's not explicit, it doesn't exist. If those rules are explicit, it does give people the freedom to instantly move to all corners to make progress there.
Yeah, like the analogy also of the highway. Without the speed signs and the lines on the road and the clear indicators where to go off and how many meters is the next turn off and standardization of that, it will be a chaos, no, on the motorway. Anybody can imagine that. A motorway with just like a wide lane and no rules, yeah, we're going to get accidents, man. So that's all like about rule sets.
Exactly.
So this is a little bit about people in the DAO space, the DHO space, people who are using other forms and tools other than holacracy and sociocracy in an attempt to distribute authority and in an attempt to coordinate work at scale. Now, since 2016, there's a big movement going on of the so-called decentralized autonomous organization. And we thought that was going to be our holy grail. So before we actually dove very deep into holacracy, we were considering turning GaiaNet into a DAO. And we have not done that for very clear reasons that I'm not going to all dig out today. But I want to emphasize that if you are in the DAO space or the DHO space, that these concepts are not there, pretty much. Like the concepts of leadership, the concepts of transparency, distributing the authority, but also really good structures to link the work together. And it might come there one day, but it's in a heavily, it's in a really novel space, the DAO space. And the smart contracts are great, but overall what we came to the conclusion is it's super good for, immutability of records, so you can create a significant degree of trust with a DAO, but it does not solve power play, and it does not coordinate work at scale. It does not invite people to step up. It does not create this transparency, because behind there's still all kinds of conversations going. And what we have been hearing and learning, because we've been in contact with quite some organizations who are using these tools to facilitate the same as what Holacracy facilitates, really, coordinating work with distributed authority amongst roles and accountabilities. I think this is enough information about it that I hope this presentation also, if you are in the DAO space, is helping you to see some other elements that Holacracy might be able to help you with.
Yeah, and I would want to add that it's not an either-or question. It's not like we're either going to work with Holacracy or we're going to do a DAO. DAOs are beautiful, honestly, but they just don't solve for a lot of other things. And I think DAO plus Holacracy, that will change the world.
Boom. And for that, go to Encode, a continuation of Tom's work. They've nailed it with Encode, how to connect the DAO on-chain and off-chain governance with Holacracy and legally embedded. So they are the experts. Go to encode.org for more information.
Yeah, beautiful work. So we all know pictures like this, of a traditional organizational structure, where again, it's a hierarchy of people, and you have these different layers of authority. And this is what's called a formal structure, because this is the structure on paper, right? This is how an organization might say the organization structure looks like. They often drew it out, and you have these, job descriptions that are static, they've been created many years ago, telling what a certain person should do, and they often don't match at all with the actuality of the moment, and nobody ever looks at their jobs descriptions to find out what they have to do that day. That's very different in Holacracy. But so how does a traditional organization really look like? So this is the formal structure, what's on paper, and then you have what's called the accent structure, which is how the organization is actually structured in the here and now. And probably if you look at these pictures, you might have been part of some of these in organizations that you work with, because this is really what happens, because there's no clarity on decision making, or you need to get things done from layers above you. there's all these different things, interpersonal stuff, completely interwoven with the work that needs to be done. And it's just, well, stuff like this happens, it's a complete mess. So the organizational structure in GaiaNet, for example, looks, well, really different. It's this, it's these different layers of circles and nested in other circles, and kind of a fractal structure almost. And we'll go a lot deeper into what all these different parts are. So, well, we said this already. It's really about away from structuring the people towards structuring the organization's roles and functions. So it's not about this hierarchy of people. It's again about the circles, finding where work lives and making sure that the work goes there. So Holacracy aims not to structure who has power over who, but to structure where work lives in the overall system and to dissolve the boundaries between the roles doing the work. I repeated myself there.
Well, it's nice to mention what we had. Can you go back? What we had in the recent few technical meetings, thanks to having an official Holacracy facilitator there, that something comes up, something needs to happen. And then we ask in the meeting, where does this work live? Which role feels that this belongs to the purpose of the roles that you're energizing? And then Alexander raised his hand, and that was something that I needed to get done in the organization. And then the facilitator asked Alexander, does it make sense for you to take on this project? And then Alexander voluntarily says, yes, that makes sense. And we open a new project. And that's really all the time looking at where does the work live? And then voluntarily taking on work as independent operators. So just adding that part.
Exactly. And then to give nuance there as well, it's really where Daan asks, or the facilitator asks Alexander, not as a person, but as a role. Are you willing to do this work? Does this work fit with your role? Because that isn't even the same as Alexander actually going to do that work, because he has to prioritize himself. We'll go into that later as well. But the work does live with the role, and then it's up to the role filler, the role lead, to determine what work needs to be done first. So a little bit about governance. And it really took me a long time before this actually clicked, what governance is in Holacracy. But governance is really about the structure of the organization, meaning what roles have authority over what pieces of the organization. It's really about that kind of structure and making that explicit. Because there's a process there called the governance process, and it's meant to make the implicit explicit. Because again, if it's not explicit, it doesn't exist. And this is super powerful. So every 2 weeks, for example, you have a governance meeting, which means that you're going to look at the organization, the structure of the organization itself, and you see if that still matches, or if there's, for example, certain things you would expect from a certain role that is not explicit now. Because if it's not explicit, you cannot expect work from that role to be made. So then there's a process to bring that in and add that to the role. And that's super interesting, because especially if you have an existing organization making a shift to Holacracy, you're going to find out how hard it is. Because as Bertrand Russell said, everything is vague to a degree you do not realize until you have tried to make it precise. If you're going to really zoom in to all these different roles that people are carrying in their organization and stuff, it's quite a complex process to really make that very explicit and clear to everyone what the work actually means that's being done there.
Yeah, I really like this metaphor that it's a playbook, it's the playing field. And the governance process is to adjust the playing field. And you can imagine something that all the drivers on the motorway, next to using the motorway and driving their car on the motorway, they also get to influence the rules on the motorway. That means they get to indicate, maybe they find out this speed, this part there's 100 kilometers an hour, but we can easily drive 150 here. Or maybe it's too dangerous here. And then you all have a voice, and you get to influence that through a very beautiful process that's designed to integrate all the harm and objections that could occur, to avoid harm actually, and to integrate objections. So yeah, it's this rule book, it's this playbook, it's this making it explicit, huh? Yeah.
Exactly. And what's interesting as well there for me is that in that meeting, we actually kind of put all the roles on the table that are currently there, and we can all make proposals about any role,
Yeah.
as long as it starts from a felt tension, right? So, for example, Daan has is embodying a certain role in GaiaNet, and I expect work from that role, but it's not explicit as an accountability. But I need that. Then I can just go to governance and add it to the role that he's embodying at this point, because it's not about me asking work from Daan. It's about creating the governance structure that's needed to work towards the purpose. So it really doesn't matter how much capacity there is, or if Daan has room for more accountabilities and more work. That's really not the point. You figure that out in other structures and with other rules. But that governance process is just to create that ideal situation in the now for the structure. So another way to think of this is to make the distinction between operation and governance. So operation, that is what in Holacracy is worked on in the tactical meeting, let's say, or that's where it starts, is about working in the organization. So that's really about the output you're delivering. Then there's governance, which is working on the organization. So that's determining what work should live where, and that more what authority should live where. Yes, and I think we dove into the role is differentiated from the soul enough. So there are a couple of different outcomes that come out of this governance meeting. There are really three major things that can be done. One is about roles, so you can create, remove, or modify roles. The second is about domains and policies. That's really about, again, defining the playing field, the rules of the game. For example, a domain might be the website. You might not want that all team members can have access to the backend of the website and start changing things. So you can create a domain out of that, and there are certain rules there that people should abide by when they enter the website. And the third one is to elect people. So there are certain elections to be done, certain roles that are always elected, and that's also done in governance. And we'll go deeper into those roles in a later presentation. Want to add something now?
No, go on.
Oh, sorry. So, want to then maybe talk about Holacracy in action?
Yeah, because now we've just done a lot about the mindset, but how does it really work, How does it really work when you come together as a team? And what does that look like? And if you've never experienced this, then also this will be very new. Because normally in an organization, when you try to get something done and you need something from another role, you need to go ask. And then you need to hope that they say yes to begin with, that you are not guaranteed. And then you need to also hope that once they've said yes, that they're actually going to do and deliver that. In a way that is not very different in Holacracy, because you trust in the autonomy of each individual. So you can request for work, but you cannot order anybody. You can also not ask for a deadline and force them to adhere to that deadline. So it's all done voluntarily, and you trust in the judgment of each individual. But there's a really beautiful process where we can cover, we cover sometimes 15, sometimes 20 different agenda items in a 1-hour meeting. And we really get our needs met. So what does Holacracy in action mean? It means the roles come together and they use this process defined by the rule set, which is called the tactical meeting. This is an operational meeting, consists of 2 parts. The first part we call the preamble, where you share a lot of information, you do a check-in, and you start building your tensions, your agenda items. You might have prepared some already. And then all these agenda items are processed in the second half. That's where we triage our tensions. And the process is designed for you to get either one of these 4 things met. They are requests, really. There is a request for work, for someone to get something done. And it could be you don't know which role it belongs, so you bring it in the tactical and you ask, this needs to happen in the organization. To which role belongs this? What we explained earlier in the example. Can also be that you need some small data or opinions of others that can be covered within a few minutes. And that's a request for opinions, get some perspectives from other people. And then you can request the attention of the whole group. So it could be that you're working on a project and you feel it's very important for the other roles to know more details other than just your project update. To, I don't know, maybe something amazing happened. Maybe you think this is very relevant for the future of the organization and you would like to take a couple of minutes to have everybody listen to you properly, requesting the other's attentions. And finally, what you can do in the technical meeting is request an ongoing expectation. And for example, I don't know, you're not sending out a newsletter as an organization and you would really like that to happen on a weekly basis, and you can argue for why that is important. So you can bring it with logic and you can explain your intention. And then what usually happens is the secretary in the meeting logs a governance tension. And it could happen that you ask for a modification in the governance structures, in the records. And that's requesting an ongoing expectation. So it could be adding a role, adding an accountability, or any of the likes. And in that tactical meeting, and I actually throughout your work, as you are energizing your roles, you function as a sensor in a self-organizing network of nodes. And what that means is that, you're all equal partners. So there's no bosses and there's no employees, and each individual is invited to feel as much as they can what is the difference between the most ideal situation and the current situation. And those are tensions. So in that way, you are a tool for the organization to manifest its purpose. In other words, each individual, again, each role filler holds a part of that purpose. And you're constantly feeling into if your role that you're energizing is in the most ideal situation to serve that purpose. And if there's any difference, then you write them down, you log them, and you bring them to tactical or you request for work, and it happens by itself. So what does that mean? You're like acting like a sensor that is receiving input by being present, by sensing all the time and sense making and responding to the input that sensor is receiving. Now, this is very different from designing and engineering top down. It's even very, very different, and this is very important, it's even very different than thinking about how it should work. And maybe this has been one of the things I've seen difficult for people who start to use this, and for ourselves, to not think of plans of 3 months into the future, but keep feeling and sensing and responding to the here and now. For that you use purpose, for that you use strategy, but that's out of the scope of this presentation. But there are all kinds of tools to support roles in sensing and responding to the most ideal situation.
So interesting that you use as an example a strategy of 3 months, which now with our Holacracy practice sounds like a lot. But of course, many organizations have like 5-year plans or whatever, And of course, they never come true, never do. Like they spend, I don't know how much money on these consultative firms telling us how the future is going to be.
The big hairy goals, no?
No, surprise, nobody can predict the future, So maybe focus on the here and now, see what we can prove now in order to move us a little bit forward. And if we keep doing that all the time, you don't even need the plans, because why? We're all working towards that purpose. That's the plan. That's the direction.
Yeah. And all organizations on this planet are going to feel the urgency of transforming their operations into this. Because the world is changing so fast nowadays. The environments, the economical situations, the market positioning. It's not going to work anymore in 5 or 10 years from now with the exponential evolution of technology, the new opportunities happening all the time. You have to be in the moment, man. It's just not going to fly anymore in a couple of years. And companies are going to fail. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's actually research done by Harvard, the American university, about holacracy. And basically what they found was that if you are in a quickly developing, quickly moving field, where a lot of changes happen and there's a lot of innovation, then it works much better than traditional hierarchy. While if you're in a factory, for example, or a bank, and the process is already completely predefined and there's nothing really new happening, then you're better off with a traditional hierarchy structure. It's just a lot more efficient and effective. But as Daan says, I don't know how many of these kind of organizations will survive.
And how many are going to be around? Because the banking system is also starting to get influenced. The production industry is getting influenced by the rapid changing technology, and they can't dodge the bullet anymore. So look at cryptos, look at PIX, look at all these new technologies in refi, DeFi, whatever, man. It's like even the most solid structure, I think even law is going to change. The law books and judges, but it's going to take 10, 20 years for that to happen. But I think nobody can avoid this at some point anymore.
Now imagining judges working on Holacracy, that's probably some new interesting tensions that might come up there.
Cool.
But yeah, man, all right. Oh yeah, could you tell us a little bit about the duties you have as a partner?
Of course. This is very clearly described in the Constitution, so you can read it up. But if you choose to energize roles, that means you choose to become a partner of a purposeful organization, then you thereby commit yourself really to these three duties. And they're very important, that you can rely on each other and that you can work smoothly together. So these are some rules for individuals, how to act within this system. And that is the duty of transparency. That means any partner can ask any other partner at any time, what are you working on? What are your projects and what are your next actions? And you are asked to give that information, no hiding. Then there is the so-called duty of processing. That means processing your communications, processing your tensions also. You are expected as a partner to regularly tune into the purpose of the roles that you are energizing and their accountabilities, and assess if you are sensing and responding adequately as a representative of these roles. And then finally, there is the so-called duty of prioritization. So this is specified in the Constitution. If I remember well, it's the duty of prioritization towards your communication, prioritizing answering to other partners first, then prioritizing your meetings, the constitutional meetings, tactical and governance, and then there is the prioritization of your next actions and projects over other meetings with other people. So there is some guidance for people how to properly make your daily plan, really. Those are duties of partners. And what we have... sure.
Add to the duty of prioritization as well, because this is also quite a beautiful thing where, like, especially in organizations, there are always a lot of people who are carrying many roles, really. Like with GaiaNet, I don't know, I have 6 or 7 different roles, and it could very well be that Daan's expecting work from one of my roles. And then he can ask, and I'm not doing it because I have a certain priority, and Daan is always free to ask me, like, okay, finance role, what are your priorities now? Or partner, what are your priorities now? And where is my request on your list, just to get a sense. And that moves around, of course, because, so we only give projections. We don't give deadlines, as Daan already mentioned. So people can still ask, when do you expect to prioritize my work? And I can say, well, next week, or my work, the work that I'm expecting from your role. And I might say, okay, next week, but it could very well be that in an upcoming day, something changes and I have no obligation to actually do it next week, but I'm still obliged to actually give a projection about what my priorities are.
The amount of times that saved me a lot of personal tension between all of you, with all of you, I mean, just by hearing, so what are you doing all day? What's your plans? Because I was feeling that somebody was maybe not doing the work that I was waiting for. But then I hear how the partner is prioritizing, and it makes total sense. And it's like, oh, that's where your energy goes to. Yeah, okay, keep going. And then I know how to shift my priorities, because it looks like what I'm waiting for or needing for my role is going to take a little bit more time. And I change my priorities. But this, like, avoids frustration, disappointment, stress with each other, pushing each other, and a lot of things that happen in a traditional environment. Just by sharing transparently, what are your priorities? What are you working on? What are you doing next? And this is what I need also. And then finding out if that matches, It's so beautiful. So we have also some other agreements that is relevant to mention, that they're not really duties of partners, but this is something that we commit to. Worth mentioning, their extra containers and agreement spaces necessary for Holacracy to function in action. The first one is relational agreements. That is, how do we as human beings interact together? And we use nonviolent communication as a guideline, and we use the 4 agreements as a guideline, which is just like, how do we act together? But we also have a social agreement together, which clearly defines which process we fall back to if we do enter into personal conflict. So it's very good to sign that together and commit to all of that. And then, you can also trust that whenever things happen at the personal level, it's going to be fine and you're going to take care of it because you have something to fall back to. And finally, obviously, we're still in the legal landscape. We all need to have legal agreements. What kind of organization do we have? And what is the contract that I have with the organization? So just worth mentioning. So we talked already a bit about tensions as a creative force. And this is really, for me, the main driver of the evolutionary purpose of the organization, to properly understand what this means. What is a tension? What are partners? And what are the meta agreements? We pretty much covered this already before, but tensions are these felt gaps between the current situation and the ideal situation. And the function of these tensions, we call them the creative force that moves the organization forward, where the organization in this case is a living organism expressing an evolutionary purpose. So it's like there's this great goal in the future, this is the current situation, and the more all the partners feel into their tensions, the more clear it becomes where it can be pulled towards that greater goal. So it's all like a positive pull. Huh? See it not as a problem, as a positive pull. And in there you have the partners, they serve as sensors, what we talked about, and we have these meta agreements. So these are the legal agreements, the relationship agreements, and the constitution. So these are these higher level boundaries of the organization that you can see as the playing field or the highway with the lines and the speed signs. So
I want to emphasize that you're feeling a tension, because that's already something that we're not per se used to. So like we already mentioned before, like we're often very used to getting into our heads, creating these ideas, structures, blah, blah, kind of top down. And we're not per se, depending on the organization you're working on, used to, even wording the things we're feeling, even like just giving words to them, because like if it's truly about the here and now, something happens, it happens in your body. You're like, something is, and it can be we should be there, and it can be, something's not right here or whatever, but it's something you feel in your body. And that's like such an important distinction as well. Like are you having a good idea of something that might be nice in the future? Or is it a felt tension in the here and now that we should do something with? And that in and of itself takes quite some practice, depending on your own background and experience.
Let's undress this more in the next slide. So Floris emphasized they're sensed, they're not thought, these tensions. And in a way, to define it properly, it's anything other than total neutrality. So there's some kind of sensation. And they're definitely not just problems. Because a lot of people think that tension is a negative word, that there's then a problem. If you have a tension with another human being, then I already feel it straight away. It's like, oh my God, there's something heavy. But no, it really see it as the gap between the current and the most ideal situation. There's a tension between it. There's just space for movement. You will see when you start to work with this that when you're feeling this and you're feeling the ideal situation is missing or there's some unclarity or whatever, you just bring it into the group. And sometimes you just get some input, some opinions, some perspectives, or you hear something from another role. And this information that you're receiving just like opens up the body completely. And you just feel it relax. And you feel it, in Dutch we have a word for that, ontspannen. So the Dutch word for tension is spanning. And in a meeting we are ontspannen. That's like, untensioning the tension. It is really beautiful. Some final footnotes. about how to work with tensions in the operations is that you cannot feel a tension for somebody else. So if you are starting to talk about what that role should be doing or feeling in that moment, you're already off track. And what is also really important is to deal with one tension at a time. And this is a practice throughout all of your life that's going to benefit you in all of your relationships. If you got beef with somebody, or if you need information, or you have something you would like to resolve in your life, just talk about that one thing and don't bring in 20, 30 other things. The facilitator will guide this process, so it's very strict on dealing with one tension at a time. And sometimes there is a sub-tension that's really part of that same tension, and that will also get dealt with. But it often happens that somebody brings in something completely different that has nothing to do with that tension, but it came up for them. So we're dealing with them one at a time in a tactical meeting and maybe undressing them into some sub-tensions. So in all of this, and in dealing with your tensions, and in energizing roles, well, there's a beautiful quote by Spider-Man, which says that with great power comes great responsibility. And this slide is all about self-leadership. This is really about being an autonomous, independent actor in the pursuit of purpose. Because, Floris explained it before, we find some of these kind of parent-child relationship in traditional organizations. Asking for approval, seeking recognition, seeking permission. In Holacracy, we practice to really eliminate that out of the work. And therefore, you need to be a leader in your own work. It's self-leadership, and that's essential in self-organization. Again, emphasizing it's very important that you take leadership in your roles, okay? And thereby it also means that you learn to differentiate your personal tensions that you might have with individuals, or you could have personal tensions with the organization. It can be about your salary or about the times that you're working. Anything that's between you and the organization as an individual for your own personal needs, you're asked to differentiate properly from organizational tensions. And it's called differentiating the role from the soul. And that's also for you to really, incorporate this idea that the organizational purpose is not your purpose. So even though you might love the dream of the organization, you might love the vision, and you feel you have an important part in that, we practice within self-organization to leave out our personal ideologies and beliefs and preferences that we have as an individual and properly process them in other spaces because they're important, right? Because they're your evolution, and your evolution is relevant for the organization, but it's very different than processing organizational tensions. Now, as you might imagine, or if you probably experienced this in your life, many people get triggered, We have traumas, we have beliefs, we do not like certain things happening. We have things from our childhood, from our relationship with our parents. So that's okay. That's okay that these things are activated in you. And we have seen that for people to really shine and to really perform well in those roles, you have to have some kind of minimum state of being. And what does that specifically mean? Well, that means that if you notice yourself when you're coordinating work with others in self-organization and you just get angry all the time and sad and disappointed and you have strong negative emotional responses, then maybe it's not the time yet. And maybe need to step back and do some other things in your life before you really work with independent actors. And also to know that it's a learning journey. So it's also okay if you start with this, and it's quite normal, I think, that a lot of these triggers come out in the first couple of months of people practicing self-organization. And as you practice and as you go, you learn to trust the others more. And you will also see that these strong negative emotional responses will subside. They will become less.
Yeah, so maybe to add a little bit about that minimum state of being. So of course, it's not to say that you have to be some enlightened guru to be ordered to be able to practice holacracy, but it is about self-awareness, being able to recognize the triggers and then or the tensions and feeling in what context do they belong. should they be here now in this gathering of roles that are coordinating work, or should I take this to the resonance meeting or the feedback sessions that we have on an interpersonal level, or so as long as you're able or you're practicing in recognizing when you're talking from a role and when from a soul and who is feeling the tension, then I think you're good to start practicing at least.
That's enough, huh? Yeah, that's enough.
And
Basic
that is
self.
still quite something. I mean, we're all practicing. So coordinating work between roles. This is still something like we're learning as well, because if you have this big set of rules in Holacracy and it's all quite complex and all these kind of new words or with slightly different meanings than you might be used to. So that means that it's quite easy. At least I had quite a period where I had a lot of these what if questions, and I was trying to figure out, so I'm expecting work from someone in another circle, so I should go through this role first, and then what structure should I follow? And then every time I would ask a question like that to somebody who was actually like these hardcore Holacracy people, the answer is always really the same. It's like, okay, just ask the role, or just do it and see what happens. Or, it's always really about being super pragmatic and just taking the next step. And the most obvious path forward is usually the best one to take. And yes, there are these longer structures just in case something goes wrong or it is not possible to solve it in a one-on-one with a different role. But 99% of the time it is. And you just go for the easiest, shortest route and see if they can help you out. And this is also about like tensioning the system. I think Daan already mentioned it once, how okay it is to start, creating tensions for people as well, to just start running, just start going, building things, and then trusting other roles that they will bring in their tensions and that you will resolve it as well. And it helps, because the more tensions are felt by these partners, by these roles, or these sensors of the organization, the more places we see where improvement is possible in order to work towards the purpose again. So the faster people just start trying out things, then that evolutionary sense comes in again. People vary, and then we learn, and then we encode and make sure it's actually in there. So by actually just going and tensioning the system can give really beautiful outcomes and actually helps you grow more in that.
I got so much done this year by really learning this. So it's magical. And I hope for the whole world to arrive at this state at some point by just going for it. But it needs to be safe, huh? And our Holacracy gives all these organizational safety checks. So awesome.
Yeah, maybe to give a very short example about that. So recently with another organization, I'm not a web builder. I had a software company, so I understand it a little bit, but I'm not familiar with actually building software. But nobody else was, so I decided to start building a website. But it looked completely terrible, and I wasn't feeling like creating all these content, all these pieces of text for the website. It's a lot of work, so I just had like this basic structure and I never put it online because I was like, no, we have to finish this first. Then tensions came out of the organization, like, we need a website for XYZ. And I was like, okay, let's just do it. So I put it online as it is, and it honestly looks terrible, and I've seen some bad websites, but this was disgusting. And what happened was people got triggered, people got tensions, and people started going because it was we had no restrictions on people allowing to enter the website, log in, and just start changing things. So people started changing things, getting out harmful things, and just optimizing that. And it was just beautiful to see how I could have taken that step months back, and we would have a much better website already, because I could just have been tensioning the system. So a little bit about resource allocation. So an important thing, which is not per se recognized in traditional organizations as well, is that people are not resources. Time is a resource, money is, different assets, talent might be a resource, but not people. And resources are they're kind of an exemption to a certain extent to the kind of anything is allowed rule. Because of course, resources are limited in most cases, so there have to be structures in place in order to divide those resources. And the most important and obvious one is, of course, budgets and financial allocation of money, which you don't want that everyone can just do at random. But there are, again, beautiful processes there in place in order to make rules around it that work for everyone, and specific roles that are allowed to allocate resources.
And wonderful that you get to work, if you choose this in your organization, to co-create your salaries together. You can also allocate these resources through Holacracy, so it has all kinds of things in place with roles and projects and domains and whatever. It's amazing. It's amazing. Nobody's telling anybody how much you're worth. You determine that together. And you argue for it. And you come up with proposals. And you answer the clarifying questions. And maybe you integrate certain objections about certain salary bands. And it's incredible. It's such a different way to deal with what is available and what do we want to create.
Yeah. And so uncomfortable in many ways as well. I know for Daan and I, we've been working on like these consultancy gigs where there's money coming in, and then we have to divide the money between us, and we don't have a structure in place, and we very consciously decided not to have one in place, not to come up with one, but just start exploring that, feeling the tensions that come up, and kind of talking about that. And it's so interesting because money is, of course, filled with triggers for everyone, so to be able to, as equal partners, sit there, also as friends. So that layer is there. You have the interpersonal layer, you have the role layer, and how do we navigate this tricky area of finance? And it's so beautiful to be able to do that, to really explore the depths of our personal and role tensions together and coming up with actual solutions. So thank you, Daan.
Thank you too. So this is our last slide for today. We have a conclusion slide also, of course, at the end, where we will go shortly back. But this is worth mentioning for the basic mindset and the introduction, and also to repeat it again, because we have briefly touched upon it on the 4 spaces, where we showed what is Holacracy and what is not. And there we already talked about the people context. So that's what you see here in the right top, where we have the association. And that is where purpose-aligned members engage to grow, develop, and support each other as a community of independent actors. In the right bottom, you see the work, which is the organizational container, where the work for purpose is being done, self-organized with explicit rules of collaboration. You could use Holacracy, you can use sociocracy, you can make up your own rule set, whatever, but the work is coordinated with explicit rules of collaboration. And then we have the so-called the company, and that is the so-called legal context. Again, completely different container with completely different rules and different processes to interact with the outside legal landscape. And there, the principles of self-organization can be translated into legal structures and connected to a DAO, what ENCODE has managed to do, providing both on-chain and off-chain governance. Definitely check out the website if that calls your attention. But for us, at some point, the sweet spot is a so-called symbiotic enterprise, where we integrate the people context, the work context, and the legal context, and encode all of the rule sets to pretty much avoid any abuse of power whatsoever. Not only distribute the work and the authority, but also distribute the liability. And we are not there yet, but that is the most, if you ask me, the most beautiful form of a symbiotic enterprise with independent actors in the pursuit of purpose, and then you really distribute everything. So we're not going to go too deep into that rabbit hole, but it's a very exciting one. Do you have anything to add before we go to the conclusions of today about this one?
Yeah, I want to recognize that Holacracy is just about the organization. And these other fields that we added here, I want to give deep credits to Christiani for bringing that in with us as well, and our symbiotic enterprise model, because it's so beautiful to bring all these containers and having them differentiated as well, and realize that there's specific things that are needed for those contexts. And this is again like the same as the separation of the role and the soul, or the differentiation between the two. Like the more aware we become of these different contexts, the more smooth every context in and of itself will go.
So, we've come to the end of this wonderful presentation about the mindset and basics of self-organization. We've covered with you what it looks like, what Holacracy is all about, how does it work in the basics, and also hope that we have given you a little bit of a pointer of the potential for you as an individual to evolve professionally, but also personally. And we hope also that you are inspired that if you want to coordinate work at scale and you want to avoid or at least reduce the amount of personal issues that people have when they coordinate work, then we hope you're inspired by this particular tool. And I think it's also worth concluding that this really is the basic video, really high level, that just touched on the concepts and not the actual mechanics, and that there are other videos that we have that are about operations, governance, and the structure, and probably in the future, many more training materials to help you to self-organize. Yeah, anything to add maybe about GaiaNet or about this video presentation today?
I was just thinking about all the other videos we're creating. So if your mind is already fried after this one, don't worry, we have many more to come. No, it's like what I do want to emphasize here as well is that it is, as I said, quite a deep practice. And really what helped us enormously was getting a professional facilitator in that was helping us through the process. Because even if you understand the rules on a rational level, it's very different from embodying. And it's great to have someone there who knows the rules that deeply and can, steer whenever needed in order to help you to really grasp these ideas on a deeper level. Because it is a spiral, and there's really a deepening. And every few weeks I'm again like, oh, now I'm starting to grasp it, and it is really a beautiful process. And it's super difficult to do by yourself in the beginning. So I would definitely recommend to just find a Holacracy coach or facilitator to help you out in the beginning.
It's good to mention that footnote. If people are inspired now, and if they are curious to start implementing that in their life or organizations, know that many have gone before you who have failed at it. And know that many people have turned away from Holacracy because they never got past the valley of despair. They just first thought, oh wow, great, this is amazing, this is going to work. And then they went practicing it and they discovered that it was very hard. And many people have aborted this, which is a pity. Because if they would have had a good guide and good guidance, then somebody could point them out like, oh, you're here now on the road and you're doing great because you're working towards that, and hang in there a little bit and keep practicing those things because at some point it's going to feel natural, And yeah, it's a pity. So we are also here to help, of course, with any of that. If you need any support or if you are, we can also refer you to other people in the network that we have to find the right guidance, the right support that really suits you as an individual and that really suits the organizational purpose of what you are working on. Aho.
Aho.
So thank you for listening and watching. And hope to see you in other videos and hope to see you in some of the spaces in co-creating this beautiful world that we know is possible in our hearts.
Thanks, everyone. Ciao.
Ciao.